If you grew up on an American farm in the 1960s and money was tight, you carry memories no city kid could ever understand. You knew the sting of cold linoleum at 5 in the morning, the weight of a milk pail, the taste of powdered milk you pretended to like. You knew what it meant to wear your brother's shoes and your sister's coat and never once think it was strange. Number 8 on this list is something the experts warned against, but your mother swore by it. And number 1, it's the thing that still puts a lump in your throat 60 years later. These weren't hardships back then, they were just Tuesday. So before we begin, hit that subscribe button if you remember when a nickel felt like a fortune. Let's count down 25 things only farm kids who grew up poor will truly understand. Number 25, penny candy and the weight of a nickel. A nickel was not money to a farm kid in 1962. It was a small miracle. You earned it pulling weeds in the bean rows under a July sun, or you found it under the seat of the truck and said nothing, holding it in your fist all the way to the general store. There, behind the glass counter, lay the whole world. Bit-o honey, root beer barrels, wax bottles filled with sweet syrup, Mary Janes that pulled the fillings right out of your teeth. The shopkeeper waited, patient, while you agonized over how to spend 5 whole cents. You could get a dozen pieces if you chose carefully, and you made them last for days, sucking on a single peppermint until it turned to a sliver on your tongue. Town kids could buy candy whenever they liked. For you, it was an event you remembered all summer. That is why, to this day, you cannot waste a thing. Number 24, the Sears Wish Book at Christmas. When that thick catalog arrived in the mail in November, it was the most exciting thing to come into the house all year. You and your brothers and sisters would lie on your stomachs on the cold floor by the stove, turning the glossy pages, dog-earing the bicycles and the BB guns and the dolls with eyes that closed. You knew deep down that none of it was coming, but the dreaming was free, and the dreaming was everything. On Christmas morning, you might find an orange in the toe of a sock, a few walnuts, a small toy carved by your father in the barn after you'd gone to bed. And you were grateful, truly grateful, because you understood what the year had cost. That catalog taught you to want quietly and to be thankful for little. Children today swim in plenty and feel nothing. You learned that wanting and getting were 2 different worlds. Number 23, feed sack dresses and flour sack shirts. Here is something the city never knew. The flour and chicken feed came in cotton sacks printed with flowers and checks and tiny calico patterns, and the companies did this on purpose because they knew farm wives would buy the brand whose sack made the prettiest dress. Your mother would study the patterns at the feed store like a woman choosing silk, holding sacks up to the light, making sure she had 3 of the same so there would be enough cloth. Then, at the treadle sewing machine by the window, she turned chicken feed into your Sunday dress, your school shirt, your underthings, the curtains, the dish towels. Nothing matched store-bought, but it fit you, and it was made by hands that loved you. You wore corn and wheat on your back and never felt poor for it, because every girl in that one-room school wore the same. Number 22, hand-me-downs worn soft and thin. New clothes were for the firstborn, if anyone. By the time a shirt reached you, the middle child or the youngest, it had clothed 2 brothers before you and been let out, taken in, patched at both elbows, and washed until the color was only a memory. You knew the geography of every garment, which knee your brother had torn climbing the hayloft, which button your mother had replaced with one that didn't quite match. When your turn came to grow out of it, You handed it down again without a word, and it kept going until it became a rag, and then a quilt square, and then nothing at all. You never once asked for something new just because you wanted new. You wouldn't have known how. Want was a thing you swallowed and didn't speak of. Number 21, cardboard in the bottom of worn-out shoes. When the sole of your shoe wore clean through and you could feel the gravel of the lane on the ball of your foot, you didn't get a new pair. You got a piece of cardboard cut from a cereal box to the shape of your foot, slipped inside to cover the hole. It worked fine until it rained. Then the cardboard turned to mush and your socks soaked through, and you walked the rest of the day with cold, wet feet, and you didn't complain because complaining changed nothing. You learned to cut a fresh piece each morning, to keep a stack of them by the door. Years later, you would meet grown men who'd never wanted for a thing, and you'd watch them throw out shoes with a little wear left, and you'd say nothing, but you'd remember the feel of wet cardboard, and you'd quietly save yours a little longer. Number 20, one pair of shoes a year if you were lucky. Come fall, before school started, you got fitted for shoes, and those shoes had to last until the next fall, no matter how fast your feet grew. So your mother bought them a size too big, and you wore 2 pairs of socks at first to fill them out, and by spring your toes were curled and aching against the front. The minute the weather turned warm enough, the shoes came off and stayed off. You ran the fields barefoot from May to September, and the soles of your feet turned to leather, tough enough to cross a gravel road without flinching, tough enough to step on a stubble field. City children kept their shoes on all summer. You earned calluses like a badge, and you could outrun any of them across a stubbled cornfield without so much as a wince. Number 19, the wringer washing machine and the Monday wash day. Monday was wash day, and it was an all-day battle. Your mother filled the wringer machine with water heated on the stove, scrubbed the worst stains on a washboard until her knuckles were raw, then fed each piece through the wringer, 2 hard rubber rollers turned by a crank. You learned early to keep your fingers clear of those rollers because every farm wife knew a woman who'd caught a hand and the bones that snapped. The wash came out twisted flat and went onto the line, and in winter it froze stiff as boards before it dried, shirts standing up by themselves like scarecrows. The whole thing took hours, and there were no days off. You carried the wet baskets, you hung the small things, and you understood that clean clothes were not a thing that simply happened. They were one. Number 18, darning socks and saving every button. Nothing was thrown away while a single use remained in it. When a sock wore through at the heel, your mother slipped a wooden darning egg inside and wove the hole shut with needle and thread, and that sock served on. When a shirt finally died, the buttons came off first and went into a tin can, a Maxwell House can full of mismatched buttons that every farmhouse had, and the cloth went to the rag bag. You watched your mother turn collars, patch knees, and let out hems, and you absorbed a truth the modern world has forgotten. A thing is not finished when it tears. It is finished when there is nothing left of it to use. You can still hear that button tin rattle when you close your eyes, and you still can't throw away a good button to this day. Number 17, quilts pieced from everything that ever was. On a winter night, you slept under quilts so heavy you could barely turn over, and every square in them was a piece of your family's history. There was your father's old work shirt, your sister's outgrown dress, the feed sack that had once been curtains, all stitched together by your mother and grandmother around the kitchen table on long evenings. Nothing in a quilt was bought. It was the afterlife of cloth, given one more chance to keep someone warm. The women would quilt together in winter, needles flashing, voices low, and a single quilt might take all season. You slept under the whole story of your people, and the cold could not reach you. Those quilts outlived the people who made them. Some of you sleep under one still, and it is the warmest thing you own. Number 16. The party line telephone and the neighbor who listened. If you had a telephone at all, you shared the line with half the township, and every household had its own ring, 2 longs and a short, 3 shorts, and you learned them all. When the phone rang, the whole valley heard it, and you knew that lifting the receiver to make your own call meant you might find Mrs. Henderson already on the line, gossiping, and you'd have to wait. And everyone knew, though no one admitted it, that you could lift the receiver quiet as a mouse and listen in on a neighbor's conversation, your hand over the mouthpiece, holding your breath. Privacy was a thing that didn't exist out there, and somehow that made the community closer. When trouble came, when a barn caught fire or a child took sick, the whole line knew within the hour, and the whole line came. Number 15. The radio in the evening and the family gathered close. There was no television, or if there was, the reception was a snowstorm of static, so the radio was the window to the world. After supper and after chores, the family gathered in the front room, and you listened, all of you together, to the farm report, to the weather that decided whether the year would be good or hard, to the ball game crackling in from a city station after dark. You did your homework by the same lamp the radio sat beside. You learned to see pictures in your head from voices alone, a skill the television generation never needed and never got. The radio was company on the loneliest nights, and the sound of it low in the evening still feels like home to you, like the safe close of a long day's work. Number 14. Powdered milk and the government commodities. When money ran shortest, the milk came from a box. Powdered milk mixed with water in a pitcher never quite dissolved, never quite tasted right, and you drank it because there was nothing else, telling yourself you couldn't tell the difference, knowing that you could. And there were the commodities, the government surplus that came to families who qualified, the great blocks of yellow cheese, the cans of pork that needed no label because everyone knew what was in them, the powdered eggs, the peanut butter you had to stir for 10 minutes. There was no shame in it then, because half the county lined up the same. You learned that a full belly mattered more than pride, and that a block of government cheese, fried in a pan, could taste like the finest thing in the world when you were hungry enough. Number 13. Saving the bacon grease in a coffee can. By the stove sat a can, half full of pale yellowed bacon grease, and it was treasure. Your mother poured the morning's grease into it through a strainer, and from that came the fat that fried the potatoes, that greased the skillet for cornbread, that flavored the green beans cooked down all afternoon with a piece of fatback. Nothing was bought that could be saved, and lard rendered from your own hogs filled crocks in the cellar. The experts would come along later and call it all a sin against the heart, but your grandmother cooked in lard her whole long life and buried 2 doctors. You grew up on food cooked in fat that came from animals you knew by name, and it tasted like nothing that comes from a store. And your kitchen, even now, is poorer for the can that isn't there. Number 12. The root cellar and the canning that filled it. Down a few earthen steps, behind a heavy door, lay the root cellar, cool and dark and smelling of soil and apples, and it was the family's insurance against winter. The shelves were lined with mason jars, hundreds of them, tomatoes and green beans and corn and peaches that your mother had put up in the steaming heat of August. The kitchen, like a furnace, the pressure canner hissing on the stove all day. There were bins of potatoes and onions and squash, crocks of sauerkraut, apples wrapped in newspaper so they wouldn't touch and spoil. That cellar was the difference between eating and not eating come February. You carried jars up those steps your whole childhood, and you understood in your bones that summer's work was what kept winter from winning. Number 11. Mason jars used for absolutely everything. The mason jar was the most useful object on the whole farm, and it never went to waste. It held canned vegetables, sure, but emptied. It became your drinking glass at the supper table, the vase for the wildflowers you picked your mother, the jar you caught lightning bugs in on a June night and set by your bed to watch glow. It held nails in the workshop and buttons in the sewing room and pennies on the dresser. It carried cold tea to your father in the field at noon. There was no such thing as buying a glass when a jar would do, and a jar always would. You can spot a person who grew up like you did by one simple thing. They still drink from a mason jar and have never once thought it strange, and they have a cupboard full of lids they will never throw out. Number 10. Gathering the eggs and selling the cream for cash. Real cash money was scarce on a poor farm, and much of what little came from the chickens and the cream. Gathering eggs was your job, reaching under the warm hens, dodging the mean rooster, carrying the basket careful as glass. The eggs you didn't eat went to town in cartons and came back as a few dollars. The cream is skimmed and saved and sold to the creamery. That egg money was often what bought the things the farm couldn't make: the sugar, the coffee, the shoes in fall. Your mother kept it separate, in a jar or a sugar bowl, and it was counted and stretched and made to last. You learned the value of a dozen EGs, of a single hen, in a way no allowance ever taught a town child. Money out there was earned by living things you fed every dawn. Number 9. Churning butter and turning the cream separator. Before the butter was on the table, it was in a churn, and turning that churn was a child's endless chore. You worked the dasher up and down, or cranked the handle for what felt like forever, while your arm ached and your mother said, "Keep going, it's almost there." And finally the cream broke and the butter came. Then it was washed and salted and pressed into a mold, and the buttermilk that was left went into the cornbread or to the hogs. The cream separator was its own machine, a tower of spinning discs you fed the warm milk into and turned by hand, the cream coming out one spout and the skim out the other. Washing all those discs after was a misery. You knew where butter came from because your own arm made it, and store butter, to this day, tastes like a stranger to you. Number 8. The Saturday night bath in shared water. This is the one the experts would frown at now. Hot water was work, hauled and heated on the stove kettle by kettle, so you didn't waste it, and you didn't get a bath every day. You got one on Saturday night, ready for church, and the whole family used the same tub of water, the same galvanized wash tub set in the middle of the kitchen floor. Cleanest first, usually the baby, then on down through the children to the dirtiest, which is where the saying comes from about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater, because by the end that water was something to behold. You didn't think it strange. Heating water for 7 separate baths was unthinkable. You came out clean enough, smelling of lye soap, and you went to bed scrubbed and shining, and you understood that even being clean was a thing the family did together. Number 7. Hauling water from the well or the pump. If you were among the poorest, the water didn't come from a tap. It came from a well or a hand pump in the yard, and someone had to carry it, bucket by bucket, into the house, for cooking, for washing, for drinking, for the animals. That someone was usually you. You learned the exact weight of a full bucket and how to carry two at once to balance the load, and you learned not to spill because spilling meant going back. In winter, the pump froze and had to be primed with a cup of water saved warm for the purpose, and your hands stuck to the cold iron handle. Water, which the modern world turns on without a thought, was a thing you measured and respected because you carried every drop of it on your own two arms. You have never since left a faucet running. Number 6, chores before sunup, every single morning. There was no sleeping in on a farm, not on your birthday, not on Christmas, not when you were sick if you could still stand. The animals didn't know what day it was, and they had to be fed, and the cows had to be milked, and they had to be milked before school. So you rose in the dark, before the sun, and you pulled on cold clothes and went out into a barn, warm with the breath of cattle, and you sat on a stool and milked by hand, your forehead against the cow's flank, your fingers aching in the cold. You fed the hogs and scattered grain for the chickens and broke the ice on the water trough. Only then, chores done and the sky going gray, did you come in for breakfast and head to school. You learned that things depend on you, that living creatures wait on you, and you have never once in your life been lazy since. Number 5, the wood or coal stove that was the heart of the house. The whole house was heated by one stove, or maybe two, and they burned wood you'd split or coal you'd hauled. The kitchen, where the cook stove burned, was the warmest room, and that's where the family lived in winter, all crowded into the one warm place. The rooms upstairs where you slept were frigid, and you dressed and undressed fast and dove under the quilts. Someone had to keep the fire fed through the night or wake to a cold house and a cold start, and you learned to bank the coals just so. The chores of wood never ended, cutting it, splitting it, stacking it, hauling it in. But there was no warmth in that house your family did not make with its own hands, and the heat of a wood stove on a winter morning is a comfort the furnace generation will never know. Number 4, sharing a bed with your brothers and sisters. There weren't enough rooms and there weren't enough beds, so you shared. 2 or 3 of you to a bed, sleeping crosswise when you were small to fit more, and in the dead of winter you were glad of it, because a brother's back was the warmest thing in a freezing room. You fought over the covers, and who was kicking whom and whose turn it was by the wall, but you also whispered in the dark long after you were told to be quiet, telling stories, planning, laughing into the pillow so your mother wouldn't hear. You were never alone, never once in your whole childhood, and you didn't know that was a thing a person could be. The closeness of those nights, your family breathing in the dark around you, is something you've chased your whole life since. Some of you would give anything for one more. Number 3, butchering day in the fall. When the weather turned cold enough, it was butchering time, and the whole family, and often the neighbors, gathered for the hardest, biggest work of the year. The hog you'd fed all summer, the one you maybe shouldn't have named, met its end, and then there was a long day of labor that wasted nothing, because nothing could be wasted. The hams and bacon went to the smokehouse, the fat was rendered into lard in a great kettle, the scraps became sausage ground by hand and stuffed into casings, and even the feet and the head were used. It was bloody, hard, cold work, and it was also a kind of festival. Neighbors helping neighbors, knowing their turn would come. You watched where your winter's meat came from. You understood the cost of it in a way no shopper ever will. and you carry a respect for an animal's life that the plastic-wrapped world has lost entirely. Number 2. The outhouse and the Sears catalog. Indoor plumbing was a luxury the poorest farms didn't have, so out back, a short, cold walk from the house, stood the outhouse. In summer, it drew flies and a smell you never forgot. In winter, the walk was brutal, and the seat was a shock that woke you all the way up. And at night, you used the chamber pot under the bed rather than make the trip. And the toilet paper, when there was none to spare, was last year's Sears catalog, hung on a nail, the slick color pages saved for last because everyone knew they were the worst for the purpose. You learned not to dawdle in January. You learned the particular misery of a flashlight walk to the privy in a blizzard. And the first time your family got a real bathroom inside the house, with water that ran and a door that closed, it felt like you'd become rich beyond measure. And finally, number 1, the Sunday table where everything the family had became enough. After a week of work that never ended, of chores in the dark, and water hauled and clothes patched, and bellies that were sometimes not quite full, there came Sunday. And on Sunday, your mother laid out the best the farm could give. A chicken from the yard, killed and plucked that morning, fried golden in lard, biscuits and gravy, vegetables from those mason jars carried up from the cellar, a pie if the year was kind. The whole family, washed and in their Sunday best, sat down together at one table, hands folded, and your father said grace, and you bowed your head over food you had helped to raise with your own hands. There was never much, but around that table, with everyone present and the work set aside for one day, it was always somehow enough. You were poor in every way the world measures, and you did not know it, because at that table you had everything. And if you could go back to one moment of that whole hard childhood, it would be this one: the smell of Sunday dinner, your mother at the stove, your whole family alive and gathered close, and the warm, certain knowledge that you belonged. Those are the 25 things only kids who grew up poor on American farms in the 1960s will ever truly understand. They weren't hardships to us. They were just life, and they made us who we are. If even one of these brought a memory rushing back, leave a comment and tell me which one, because I want to know I'm not the only one who still saves the bacon grease. Thanks for watching, and don't forget where you came from.